Welcome to the Ultimate Upkeep YouTube channel, where we discuss different things Magic the Gathering and Commander related. And so today I decided I'm going to talk about my favorite deck, and I'm going to break down all the cards and the main strategy involved in playing the deck and building it, and I'll just talk about what you really need to do to win games with my favorite deck. And so I'll stop talking now, and I'll get on with the deck tech. So first up, I'm going to talk about some of the stats. So that will include the price, the type distribution, like how many creatures, and other things like that. And so first up, we have the price of the deck, and this deck is pretty pricey. It's approximately $878, and that's American prices. Um, but this deck, when I first started making it, or when I first got the list together and I started making it, I actually had printed on yellow pieces of paper proxies of each of the cards that I didn't already own, because I was just kind of getting into Commander at that point. And people at the game store that I played with, they didn't mind that I had a Chrome Mox on yellow paper, which is a card in the deck, which you don't actually need. If you find any substitutes or cards you want to take out of the deck, or swap them out because either you're not playing at this high of a power level, or you're more of a budget focused deck, that's perfectly fine. You can take out what you need, put in what you want. This is your deck, not just mine, so feel free to do what you like. Next up we have the type distribution. So the first up is ramp. We've got 14-ish ramp, because there are several cards in the deck, like for example, one called Mana Weft Sliver, that gives all your slivers the ability to be mana dorks. And so if you have a whole bunch of mana dork slivers, well, then that doesn't mean that you only have 14 ramp, because if you have 10 creatures on the battlefield, you actually have 10 extra mana, if that makes any sense. So I put an asterisk there because that means it's 14 at the base, but it could be much, much more. Next up we have the number of creatures, and that will be 32 creatures plus the commander, so 33 total. And with these creatures, these are all slivers, they're kind of your main win con. They're basically how you attack and deal damage, and if you don't know anything about slivers, they basically buff each other. So if you have one sliver and or say you have three slivers and one sliver has an ability, all of your slivers will have that ability. The way I think of it as is the slivers, you play one and then you play another one, then both slivers evolve. That's how I think of them. Next up we've got removal. There isn't much removal, there's 7, but the removal in this deck is all very powerful. There's no board wipes at all because it's all targeted removal, and you have other cards, like other slivers that can deal with creatures, and your slivers usually get pretty big, and you don't have to worry about other creatures all that much. Next up, we have card draw and card advantage. Again, a low number, 6. But the card draw and card advantage is all super, super powerful. So it's not just like one thing that draws you one card. It's things that draw you 10, 15 cards each. Next up we have lands. There's a good number of lands, 36 lands, 14 ramps, so about 50 total mana producing sources. So that's about the average that you would want. And so you might be counting up well, first there's other. And other kind of includes just different things that don't really have a place. Like they're not ramp, they're not creatures, they're just kind of on their own, but they're still good in the deck. So now you might be counting up the numbers and you might think, that's not exactly 100 cards. Are you cheating? Well, there's going to be some overlap, because some of the creatures, like I mentioned before, are also ramp, or they're also removal. So it all depends on which ones fill multiple roles. So now we're going to talk about the commander. And the commander is probably my favorite sliver of all time, and that is the first sliver. So the first sliver is 5 mana, and it's a 7/7 legendary creature sliver. And its ability is Cascade, which has very confusing text, but basically for the first sliver what happens is you would flip cards. When you cast it, you flip cards from the top of your deck, face up, and you put something that's not a land with mana value 4 or less onto the battlefield if it's a permanent, or you cast it if it's a spell. so you basically just cast something for free off the top of your deck. And he also gives all your other slivers Cascade. And the thing that I really like about the first sliver is that, say you play the first sliver on turn 5, then turn 6 you play another 5 mana sliver, and as you're cascading, you find a sliver with mana value less than 5. So let's say you go first sliver, second sliver, cascade, find another sliver, you would cascade again off of that sliver, and you keep on going until either you have no more slivers of that mana value, or you reach something that isn't a sliver. So it's just a never-ending loop until you run out of cards. Next up we have ramp, and this is when I'm going to start talking about the cards in the deck. And so I broke them down mostly by CMC, or converted mana cost. So first up we have 3 converted mana cost for ramp. And there's not much, there's just a Chromatic Lantern, which is a very, very good card in this deck. Because the way that slivers work is you always have multiple different creatures with multiple different colors. Like you'll have, like the commander has 5 colors to play. It's white, blue, black, red, and green. So if you have other slivers that are legendary, they're also all Woobird costing, which is white, blue, black, red, and green. And so this this artifact really helps you fix your mana so that you always have the mana that you need to cast your slivers, no matter how difficult their casting cost might be. Next up, we have 2 CMC, and we're starting off with an Arcane Signet, which is basically an auto-include in every single deck, because an Arcane Signet just adds 1 mana of any color that we need, or that we would need in our commander deck. And next up, we've got a Fellwar Stone, which, almost the same as the Arcane Signet, will give you mana that any lands your opponents could produce would make. So if your opponent has a blue, green, and red land, this one artifact can make blue, green, or red. And so if you're playing in a 4-player pod, the Fellwar Stone is so good because you can basically get any color you need at any time. Next up, we have a Rampant Growth. There's a few basics in the deck, and mostly just for this card. You just pay 2 mana, search for a basic land, and put it onto the battlefield. That's always a good effect to have because it ramps you out 1 land. It helps you fix your colors. It's a good card to have in the deck. Next up, we have Farseek. Almost the same idea, except that it gets anything but a forest, and they don't have to be basic. And the good part about this is there is 1 shock land in the deck. So if you need the certain specific colors, the Farseek can go get you whatever you need other than a forest. Next up, we have a 3 visits, which is kind of the opposite of Farseek. It only gets you a forest, but it puts it onto the battlefield untapped, which is very, very helpful. There's no dual forests, so you'll have to go get a basic land that's a forest, but that's still a good thing to get with this. Next up, we have a Manawef Sliver, which is 2 mana. It's a 1/1 creature, and it says Sliver creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. And there's kind of a second version of it, whereas Manawef Sliver does slivers I control. Gemhide Sliver, the exact same casting cost, exact same power and toughness, but this one says all slivers. So if you're playing in a pod where another player's playing slivers, you're actually helping them out as well, which can kind of be fun. It can be a bit of political favor. And next we have 1 CMC, and of course, when you think of Magic the Gathering, you think of Commander, you're automatically going to think of Sol Ring. 1 mana, add 2 colorless mana. It's so, so good. Auto included in every deck that I make if I have an extra 1 lying around. And this one just automatically goes in the deck. Next up we have a Carpet of Flowers, which is a CEDH, kind of like a staple. Basically, during my main phase, any one of them, so I can choose first or second, I add X mana, where X is number of islands an opponent controls. So let's say that I'm playing at a pod of 5 people, or 3 people, and one of my opponents has 3 islands. On either of my upkeeps, just once a turn though, I can add 3 mana of any color, which is very good for 1 mana. And it's an enchantment, so they're kind of harder to deal with. Next up we have the 0 CMC. So there is 1 sliver in the deck who is 1 mana. And when you cast that, sometimes it'll be hard to get a 0 mana thing, unless you have 0 CMC cards. And so all of the 0 converted mana cost cards that I have are all artifacts that are mana rocks. because that way you can just play a Sliver and you get mana. It's always fun. So first up we have a Soul Talisman, which when you look at it you might think, but it doesn't have a mana cost, it has Suspend. Well, the way that Suspend works is if you have a thing with no mana cost and you cascade into it, you can cast it without paying its mana cost, and technically it has no mana cost, so it has a mana cost of 0. Suspend is an ability, not actually its price. And so this one is basically just a second Soul Ring that you can cascade into, or you can wait 3 turns to get a second Soul Ring. Next up we have Mox Tantalite, which is the exact same thing as the Soul Talisman, same reasoning, except that it has add 1 mana of any color, so it's basically just kind of like a Chromatic Lantern for free that doesn't give your lands other abilities. And next up we have a Lotus Petal, which is a one-time use. It's almost exactly like a treasure token, except it's part of a lotus. I guess it was part of a lotus flower. But it just sacrifices and you add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. And next we have a card that's very expensive, but is not essential to the deck. It's Chrome Mox, and last I checked it was like $120 Canadian. It's a very, very expensive card, and you don't need this for the deck. This card alone is probably driving the price up a lot more than it should be. So it's 0 mana, has Imprint, and when it enters the battlefield, you exile a non-artifact, non-land card from your hand, and then you add 1 mana of any of the exiled card's colors. So if you have let's say a Carpet of Flowers in your hand, and you exile it with Chrome Mox, that means that your Chrome Mox now taps for green, and it's a 0 mana artifact, which is a very, very good price. So that's it for Ramp, and next up, sorry, the recording cut out there. So next up we have creatures, and creatures are very important for the deck. And so we're going to start off with 6 converted mana cost creatures. Again, I sorted them by mana cost. And starting off, or the only creature that's 6 mana, is a Megantic Sliver. This is 6 mana, 5 and a green. It's a 3/3, except it gives all slivers you control +3/+3. So essentially, it's actually a 6/6 for 6 mana. And this card is very good. It's a good overrun effect, which this card can win you games. If you have enough slivers and you play this, you can just win right off the bat. Next up, we have 5 CMC, which the first one is Brood Sliver, which is 4 and a green. It's a 3/3, and it says whenever a Sliver deals combat damage to a player, its controller may put a 1/1 colorless Sliver creature token into play. So the only problem with Brood Sliver, and the problem with a few of these slivers, is that it doesn't say a sliver you control, it says any sliver. So that can be a problem if you're playing in a meta with a bunch of other sliver decks. But it can also be a lot of fun. Next up we have a Sliver Hive Lord, which basically is just a commander creature or a legendary creature. It's a 5/5 that says sliver creatures you control have indestructible, makes them much harder to kill, and is a very important card in the deck. Next we have Sliver Legion, which just like Megantic Sliver, can be a very good pump effect. You have 5 slivers, they all get +5, they all get +4/+4, which is very, very strong. And finally, we have a Sliver Overlord, which has a few abilities, but the first one is 3 mana, search your library for a Sliver card, reveal that card and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Which is very helpful because this ability can get you any sliver that you want. It can get you a Megantic Sliver, a Sliver Hive Lord if you need protection, a Brood Sliver. It can get you any sliver in your deck. And it also has a secondary ability that isn't the most useful, although at my local game store, a few people do play slivers, so it can help, which is basically just 3 mana, gain control of a sliver. So you just take a sliver from someone and it's yours. And next we have 4 CMC. And first up, we have Essence Sliver, which is a very important sliver, and you'll see why at the end of the video. So this sliver has, whenever a sliver deals damage, its controller gains that much life. The important thing to remember is that this is not, I repeat, not lifelink. It may look like an older card, but this is actually the time-shifted version, so this is exactly what the card says. So, when you're playing with an Essence Sliver, and say someone plays a card, I don't know if there are any, that gives a creature lifelink. You would gain double the life because of the Essence Sliver. And next, we have a Bone Scythe Sliver. Very good Sliver, very good finisher. Just Sliver creatures you control have double strike. They deal both first strike and regular combat damage, which is very, very powerful, because first strike is helpful if you're attacking someone with some big creatures, and double strike is even better because you can hit them twice. If you have a way to make them unblockable, just go right past them and hit them twice and insta-kill them. It's a lot of fun. Speaking of unblockable, we have Shifting Sliver, which is again 4 mana, it's a 2/2, that says slivers can't be blocked except by slivers. Which basically, unless there's a whole bunch of sliver players that you're in your meta, Shifting Sliver just makes everything unblockable. But you can still block creatures, which is a lot of fun. Next up we have a Bone Splitter Sliver, which gives all slivers +2/+0. Not the most interesting, but it is an important card. Then we have Cleaving Sliver, which is the exact same thing, except this gives only slivers I control, and Bone Splitter Sliver gives all slivers +2/+0. Then we have Root Sliver, which can't be countered, and your slivers can't be countered, which is very helpful if you're playing against a counterspell deck, or a blue deck in general. And then we have more creatures. So first up we have 3 CMC creatures, I guess next. And we have a Mirror Entity, which is technically a sliver because it has Changeling, and it has an ability that says X. Until end of turn, creatures you control have base power and toughness XX and gain all creature types, which is very, very helpful, because if you have a whole bunch of mana, but nothing to spend, no cards in hand, which shouldn't happen with this deck, but let's say it does, and you want to attack and kill someone or win the game, you can use this card. Pump up all of your slivers by, let's say you have 15 mana, give them all +15/+15, and then you can attack in and just wipe everyone out. It's an awesome card in the deck. Then we have a Shadow Sliver, which this card, I will warn you, can be a problem for your own deck. If you play this card when you aren't in a position to just win the game instantly, then you're going to have problems, because this means that anyone can attack you, and they can't be blocked. Because Shadow means that you can't be blocked, but so you can't be blocked by creatures without Shadow, but you also can't block creatures without Shadow, or with Shadow. You know what I mean? So let me just read the card. All slivers have Shadow. They can block or be blocked by only creatures with Shadow. So that means that if someone is attacking you and you have this card out, you can't block, which means you could just be taken out of the game right then. Next up we have a Blade Sliver, which says all slivers get +1/+0. Pretty simple, pretty helpful. And then we've got a Spiteful Sliver, which says 3 mana for a 2/2. Sliver creatures you control have whenever this creature is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target player or planeswalker. This card paired with this Sliver Hive Lord can be very helpful, because you can just swing in, have someone block you, and then immediately deal all the damage that your sliver took back to a player, either the person who blocked or another player who's at a low life total. And then we have Lava Belly Sliver, which is another very important card for the deck, which again you'll learn about later on in the video. So sliver creatures you control have, when this creature enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target player or planeswalker, and you gain 1 life. So it's pretty helpful, and you'll see why it can be a very, very powerful card in the deck later on. Next up we have Opaline Sliver, which I kind of count this as card draw, but I also kind of don't. All slivers have, whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, you may draw a card. I think of this as more of a deterrent for people to target your slivers, because they don't want you to draw cards. So they'll decide, oh, I don't want to target you with this, and that gives you enough time to play things that give them hexproof or shroud, or makes them so that they can't be targeted. And next we have 2 CMC and 1 CMC, because I figured it would be easier to just add the 1 CMC thing at the end of the 2, like 1 commemorative mana cost, because then it wouldn't have to make a whole new page and have to do a bunch of extra editing. So first up we have a Sinew Sliver. All slivers get +1/+1, not bad. Then we have a Sentinel Sliver. They all have Vigilance, which means they don't have to tap when they attack. Then we have a Diffusion Sliver, which is a bit more interesting. Whenever a sliver you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell or ability unless its controller pays 2. So this basically means that if someone tries to target one of your slivers with a Path to Exile or Swords to Plowshares to get rid of it, they'd have to pay an extra 2 mana, which can make it, and if they don't have 2 mana to spend, then they can't even destroy your slivers or exile them, which again will give you a chance to play more protection spells and more slivers. Then we have a Heart Sliver, another very important card in the deck, because this allows you to just swing in the second that you play a Sliver. If you play a big 7/7 Sliver while you have a bunch of other pump effects, you can just swing in and hit people instantly. This is also very, very good with the Gemhide Sliver and Mana Weft Sliver, because if you play a Sliver, you can instantly tap it for mana, which is very helpful. Next up we have a Venom Sliver, which says Sliver creatures you control have Death Touch, which is a very helpful ability. Next we have Muscle Sliver, same as Sinew Sliver except in green. All slivers get +1/+1, so it's not exactly the same because Muscle Sliver gives all slivers that ability. Then we have a Quick Sliver, which gives all of your slivers Flash, and this also has Flash. And then we have a Spinneret Sliver, which gives them all Reach, so that means that if anyone's trying to attack you with flyers, then this is an easy way to block them. Then we have a Crystalline Sliver, which gives them all Shroud. This is one I was talking about earlier. So that means that they can't be the target of spells or abilities, and this deck doesn't have any spells or abilities that you want to target your own slivers with, so this only affects your opponents. Then we have a Hibernation Sliver, which is an all-star in the deck. You can pay 2 life and return a creature to your hand, or a sliver, and that helps you out so much. If you have mana open and you have a bunch of life, like say you're at 30 or 40 life, and you don't want to have to, draw a bunch of cards or do something, like you don't have cards in hand, you can just pay 2 life, put a sliver in your hand, and cast it again. And you cascade instantly, and you can get a lot of really good value out of that. Next up we have a Cloud Shredder Sliver, which is 2 mana, red and a white. Sliver creatures you control have Flying and Haste. Very helpful. Flying and Haste is good because you can instantly just play a sliver, fly over people, and hit them. And it's a really, really powerful ability. And next we have the 1 CMC, which is a Striking Sliver, which basically just gives them all First Strike. Not as good as Double Strike, but a 1 mana sliver can be very helpful in the game. Next up, we have removal. And removal is a very key part of Commander and Magic the Gathering. And if you don't have a good amount of removal, then you're going to have a lot of problems in your games. And so, in this deck, we have a bit of removal. So starting off at 3 CMC, we have Anguished Unmaking, which is just 3 mana, exile a non-land permanent, and you lose 3 life. Very versatile, very helpful, and it's an instant. Then we have a Harmonic Sliver, which is a sliver that can be a problem if you have a bunch of artifacts and enchantments on the battlefield, because this one is not a May ability. So if you end up playing enough slivers, and you start destroying you've destroyed every single artifact and enchantment your opponents control, if you go to play another sliver, you have to blow up one of your own things, which can be a big problem. So one thing that I like is with the 1 sliver, the Hibernation Sliver, that has pay 2 life, return a sliver to your hand. This one, if you want to play a sliver or do a bunch of crazy stuff, play like 6 slivers in a row, just pay 2 life, return the Harmonic Sliver, play a bunch of slivers, and then you don't have to worry about blowing up your own stuff. Next we have 2 CMC, which includes an Assassin's Trophy, which has 2 mana, destroy target permanent in opponent controls, and its controller searches their library for a basic land card and puts it onto the battlefield and then shuffles. So you destroy a permanent and you trade a land, a basic land that is. So it's not a bad trade. Then we have 1 CMC, and I did count counterspells in this, because counterspells I find to be a part of removal. If someone goes to board wipe or play a big creature, you can just remove it and not have to worry about it. But first of all, we have the 2 big ones. Path to Exile, where you exile a creature for 1 mana, and its controller searches for a basic land card and puts it onto the battlefield. And then the second big one is Swords to Plowshares, which is 1 mana, exile a creature, its controller gains life equal to its power. Next up, we've got the 2 counterspells. Flusterstorm, 1 blue mana, counter target instant or sorcery spell unless its controller pays 1, and it has Storm, so if you've played a bunch of spells or an opponent has, and you cast this, then you're going to have a bunch of extra copies of it that you can just counter everything. And then we have Swan Song, which has which is 1 blue, counter an enchantment, instant, or sorcery spell, and its controller puts a 2/2 blue bird onto the battlefield. So if you manage to counter, let's say, a doubling season, or a big, giant enchantment, instant, or sorcery, and all they get out of it is a 2/2 blue bird, then that's a really, really good trade. Next up, we have so for the card draw and card advantage section, we don't have very many options, but the options that we do have are very powerful. So again, they're sorted by mana value. First up, we have 5 CMC, and we've got a Vanquisher's Banner. So this one is 5 mana. You can choose creature as the creature, or Sliver as the creature type, and creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. So it's a small pump effect. And whenever you cast a creature spell of the chosen type, you draw a card. So with cascading slivers, if you play a sliver and you cascade into another one, you're drawing 2 cards. You get another one, you draw a 3rd card. And so this refills your hand really easily, and it really just accelerates your board ahead of everyone else. Then we've got 3 CMC, there's nothing at 4. And we start off with a Herald's Horn. I counted this as card advantage because, again, you choose a creature type and creatures of the chosen type cost 1 less. But the part that I count as card advantage is at your upkeep. If the top card of your library is a sliver, you can put it into your hand. If it's not, it just stays on top and you draw that for turn. So that can count as, oh, there's a sliver on top, I'll draw a card. And then I'll draw my card for turn, which can be very, very helpful. So then we have Rhystic Study, a big, powerful card. Rhystic Study is 3 mana. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1. And so a lot of times people won't pay the tax. Either they'll tap out and play something big, or they'll play a bunch of small things and they need all their mana. You will draw so many cards off of a Rhystic Study. And since your slivers will be so big and powerful, you'll already be a threat, and you'll be able to deal with everyone else's threats. Next up, we have a Descendant's Path, which I kind of counted as card advantage because at your upkeep, you just reveal the top card. If it's a sliver, you cast it for free. I kind of counted that, although it doesn't go to your hand, it just goes to the battlefield, which is actually better. Next, we have 2 CMC, which includes a Sylvan Library, which is just draw 3 cards at your draw step, and you can put all 3 in your hand, or you can pay 4 life if you pay 8 life. Or you can put 2 cards back or 1 card back, so it's 4 life per extra card. Then we have 1 CMC, where we have a Mystic Remora, cumulative upkeep 1, and whenever an opponent successfully casts a non-creature spell, you may draw a card, unless they pay 4. So any non-creature spell, no one's going to be paying 4 mana. The only problem is the cumulative upkeep, which you can probably deal with the amount of mana that this deck makes. Next up we have So now these are the other cards, the cards that don't really have a home, and I needed to find a place for them, so I decided to make a new category. So first up, we've got tutors. There are 2 main tutors in the deck. Worldly Tutor, which gets you a creature card and puts it on top of your deck, and Enlightened Tutor, which gets you an artifact or enchantment and puts it on top of your deck. Both of these cards are very powerful. They can get you any piece that you need, any card that you need. They can get you card draw, they can get you a big creature, a finisher, they can get you anything that you would ever need to win the game. And next up we have Reduction, which there's 1 card in here that I kind of counted, which is Urza's Incubator, which is 3 mana. You choose a creature type, and the creatures of that type cost 2 less to cast, which is just a powerful ability, because any sliver that costs 3 mana for a reason. If it suddenly costs 1 mana for that creature, you're way ahead of everyone else. You're just going to zoom ahead and no one can catch up. Next up we have Protection, and we've got some of the main, or the biggest spells in Commander. First up we have Teferi's Protection, which basically just phases you out and you can't lose the game, unless someone has an ability that says you win the game. But any combos, any board wipes, anything, you're just gone. And this can save you for a full turn. If you're the threat, you just, okay, bye, and no one can do anything to you. Then we've got a bit of a weaker version of that, Heroic Intervention, which gives your permanents hexproof and indestructible, which is good against a board wipe or targeted removal if you have to, so it's not the worst. And then we have Pump, which I think of as like pumping up your creatures, making them more powerful and stronger. So we start off with the Door of Destinies, which has 4 mana. As it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. Whenever you cast a spell of the chosen type, put a charge counter on it. And then, so you're basically going to choose Slivers. So then it basically reads Slivers you control of the chosen type, or Slivers you control. Get +1/+1 for each charge counter on Door of Destinies. Cast 4 Slivers while this is out. All your Slivers get +4/+4. It's a really, really powerful ability. Then we've got a Shared Animosity, which is kind of like a coat of arms, but with attacking and only your creatures, and that one's really powerful. I could have included coat of arms in the deck, but I decided not to because it can benefit other decks way more than your own. Even though we are playing Slivers, sometimes when you already have a Shared Animosity and you've got yourself a Sliver Legion which already does that ability, you don't need too many copies of it. Next up we have the lands. And lands are going to be a long and tedious process to talk about, but we're going to get through it. So first up we've got the 5-color lands. And there are, I think, 8 of them. And so starting off we have Command Tower, which is just add 1 mana of any color you need. Then we have an Ancient Ziggurat, which is the same thing except only for creature spells. Next we have a Secluded Courtyard, which has tap, so you choose a creature type. So you'd usually choose Slivers, and then you would tap to add a colorless, or you can add 1 mana to cast a Sliver, or to activate an ability of a Sliver, which is a really good ability to have on a land. Next we have Path of Ancestry, which is very powerful in this deck. It does enter tapped, but whenever you use this mana to cast a Sliver, you get to scry 1, which means you can set up your next Cascade, which is very, very helpful. Next we have a City of Brass, which whenever it becomes tapped, it deals 1 damage to you. But you add 1 mana of any color, no matter what. Sorry, my dogs are barking. Next up, we have a Mana Confluence, same as City of Brass, except you're paying 1 life instead of taking 1 damage. Then we've got a Sliver Hive, which is a perfect card for a Sliver deck. You can add 1 colorless, or you can add a mana to cast a Sliver spell, like 1 mana of any color. And then it has an ability of 5 and tap, to put a 1/1 Sliver onto the battlefield only if you control a Sliver. Which means if you've got +10/+10 on each of your Slivers, paying 5 mana to get a 10/10 Sliver with a whole bunch of other abilities is usually pretty good. Then we have a Reflecting Pool, which basically just, if you have a land that taps, so say you have a Command Tower, now your Reflecting Pool is a second Command Tower, which is very, very helpful. Then we've got 2-color lands, which includes a Spectator Seating, which, so I'll call them bond lands, but this is the Boros bond land that enters tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents. Next we have a Temple of Triumph, and this I'll just call the temples. So this is the Boros temple. When it enters, you scry 1, it enters tapped. All of them enter tapped, all of them scry 1. Then we have the Selesnya Temple, the Selesnya Bond Land, the Azorius Temple, the Orzhov Temple. Gosh, I'm trying to remember all the names. Then we have the Orzhov Bondland, the Rakdos Bondland, the Golgari Temple, the Golgari Bondland, the Izzet Temple, the Izzet Bondland. So basically, most of them are just the temple and the bondland. Then we've got, next, come on. Oh, I skipped ahead a bunch. Okay, well, we have 2-color lands as well. So Rejuvenating Springs is the what's the word? Simic Bondland. Then we have the Simic Temple. Then we have the, what's this one? Gruul, that's it. We have the Gruul Bondland and the Gruul Temple. Then we have the Dimir Bondland and the Dimir Shockland Watery Grave. So this is a good card to pull out with your Farseeks and cards like that. So then we have basic lands, and there's a few basic lands. There's 10 total. And we have 2 plains, we have 2 islands, 1 swamp, 2 mountains, 3 forests. So total of 10. So What's the strategy of the deck? The strategy of the deck is to ramp towards your commander first. You want to play your commander to get your Cascade going. You can play things like Sylvan Library, other ramp cards, other card draw, in order to get enough cards and enough mana to play what you need right away. Then we have, so next you want to cast extra slivers to Cascade. So you play your commander, then on the next few turns you want to Cascade and get a big board right away. And you also want to draw cards with Rhystic Study and Vanquisher's Banner in order to get yourself protection and counter spells and removal in order to protect your board. And then you really want to save your protections. You want to save your Teferi's protections and your heroic interventions for your board wipes, or for opponents' board wipes, because one board wipe in this deck can kind of just peter out, which is not good. So this deck wins through combat damage. You want to have unblockable slivers and you want to attack, or you can win through a 6-card combo, which I included in the deck on accident, and I just decided, you know what, this is kind of fun. I want to have it in here. So, the combo. Let's find out what it is. So the combo includes 6 cards. Gemhide Sliver or Manaweth Sliver, doesn't matter which one. Heart Sliver or Cloud Shredder Sliver, so anything that gives haste, anything that lets your slivers tap for mana. Then you need a Hibernation Sliver, an Essence Sliver, a Lava Belly Sliver, and a 1-mana Sliver, or you could use a Reduction spell and a 2-mana Sliver. And so the way that the thing works is you have all of them on the battlefield at once. You pay 2 life to return the Striking Sliver, sorry, let me repeat that. So first off, you start off by tapping the Striking Sliver for mana. So you'd add 1 mana. Then you would pay 2 life using the Hibernation Sliver to bounce the Striking Sliver to your hand. Using the 1 mana from the Striking Sliver that you got, you would play him for that. When he enters, because of Lava Belly Sliver, you'll deal 1 damage to target player or planeswalker and you'll gain 1 life. And because of Essence Sliver, whenever you deal damage, you'll gain that much life. So basically what ends up happening is you tap the Striking Sliver to add a mana, you bounce him to your hand for 2 life, and you play the Striking Sliver. You deal 1 damage to a player and you gain 2 life, meaning that you're actually just paying 0 life to bounce him. And you just do this infinite times. And that will give you infinite damage, infinite enters the battlefield, and infinite leaves the battlefield. Also, if you have your commander out, you're just infinitely cascading, which means eventually it'll just show off your whole deck. And this can be a really, really fun thing to do. You just win the game. People don't expect it because they don't expect to have you to have combos in a sliver deck. And it's just a lot of fun. And it's also 6 cards, so people can't get too salty about it because it took so long for you to put together. So yeah, that's the whole entire deck. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. Basically the way the deck works is you just play big creatures, attack with big creatures, and deal big damage. That's basically what it is. So my final thoughts on the deck are, this is my favorite deck of all time. It's expensive and it's taken me a year or 2 to collect most of the cards. I still don't even have all of them. Some of them are still yellow proxies. And you know, I have so much fun playing this deck. It's not completely overpowered, but it's not weak either. It's just a great, fun thing to have, and you can do so much with it. You can do infinite combos, you can deal big damage, you can... I once played in a pod where there were 3 sliver decks and 1 other deck, and we all played... we all kind of worked together and against each other, and it was a lot of fun. I don't know who won. I might have won, but I'm not sure. And just, this deck is so much fun. It's so awesome. It's just big Timmy deck. You go in, you beat people in the face, and if you have to win through a combo, you do. And it's awesome. And so if any of you want to make the deck, I'm going to post the deck list in the description. And please, just remember to like and subscribe if you like the video. Let me know in the comments if you built the deck and how you like it, and if you would play it on your own and stuff. And yeah, if you have any questions, leave a comment, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you all so much. And remember, this is the Ultimate Upkeep YouTube channel.